Welcome everybody, good morning. It's really a pleasure to have our colleague Nadim Farajallah coming directly from the American University of Beirut to visit us for a week. Being a very productive week, I suppose so, right? Actually, this talk is part of the series of seminars that NEREUS is putting together in this very special year that we're celebrating our 10th anniversary. And this week we just had a very good news. We are part on a very special list of the main schools in regional science in the world. There are only 11 schools that were listed, 5 in the US, 4 in Europe, 1 in Japan, and USP is the only one that's part of the list that's in the southern hemisphere. So we're very happy today about this news, and happier to have Nadim here as part of a partnership agreement that NEREUS has with the São Paulo Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. The main objective of this agreement that was signed last year was to provide a framework within which the parties could develop and undertake collaborative activities and projects. This is the first round of collaboration that we have, and the topic that we chose was on climate change. So we are having Nadim as one of the main Lebanese experts in the team, joining our group to share some of his knowledge. I will give you just an overview of Nadim's activity. Nadim, Dr. Farajalla started out his academic studies in irrigation engineering, attaining a master from Utah State University in Logan, Utah, US, and then an MS and a PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Oklahoma in the US. Dr. Farajalla worked in the private sector first as a senior scientist at Stone Environmental Incorporation in Vermont, the US, and then at Dar al-Handasa Shahid and Partners in Beirut, Lebanon, as a senior environmental engineer on projects which focused on water resources and associated infrastructure, environmental impact studies and management plans, hydrological studies, and erosion assessment and mitigation. Currently, he is an associate professor of environmental hydrology at the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences at the American University of Beirut, and is faculty research director of the Climate Change and Environmental and Air World Program at the São Paulo Institute. His current research focuses on the impact of climate change on human settlements and activities through extreme events of water supply, flooding, and droughts. The nexus of water, flood security, food security, and climate change with focus on adaptation and resiliency, and recovery of devastated land due to anthropogenic activities such as wars, farming, quarrying, etc. We are very pleased to have you here to share with us some of your thoughts on the main challenge of climate change for the Arab world. So thank you very much for.
Thank you, Eduardo. It is a real pleasure visiting you here. It's been every Lebanese dream to come and visit Brazil, so I got to visit, and I've been really overwhelmed with kindness and generosity. Eduardo, Joaquin, everybody here has been very nice and kind, and it's amazing how hard you work, even though you don't show that it's working hard. I mean, you hear laughter, but all of a sudden you have results in your hands, and this is what we miss at my university. We struggle to get students involved, to get postdocs in. We don't have much of a PhD program yet at our university. We do have in several areas, and it is a real pleasure and very encouraging to see how you guys work and to be part of what you're doing here. I will try to provide to you today a little overview of of an Arab perspective on climate change. I'll go through a little bit of the Arab world. Maybe you don't know what it is, maybe you do. I apologize if it's going to be too simplistic. It is more of posing questions and ideas and thoughts rather than just, a scientific diatribe. It's not scientific, it's simple approach that I'm looking at right now to present. And I do apologize if I oversimplify for some of you. I know some of you are really top-notch people in this, and for this I apologize. And I also apologize in advance for my poor economic knowledge. But I know the importance of it, so that's why I'm partnering with Eduardo. It's what makes the world go round here. So I will start with just an overview of what the Arab world is about. It covers about 10 million square kilometers of mainly arid and semi-arid lands. It is made up into a political entity like the Arab League, which constitutes 22 states, and the population is about 371 million, and the population growth rate is phenomenal. It's 2.6% annually, which is quite high. Proportion of the population, which is interesting, that is in urban and coastal areas, rose from 44% to 54% in the past 20 years. So there is a great growth in the metropolitan areas, and people are moving to cities, forsaking the rural areas, and also moving on to the coast. This just shows you the Arab world it covers from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, the 22 states, and these other states. Part in Africa, about 10, 12 in Asia, and quite weird the selection. I mean, to me, Djibouti, Somalia, Comoros Islands, and Mauritania don't speak the same language, practically, but they're in part of the Arab world. The population, if you look at the distribution of population, and I keep harping on population because of its significance in terms of economic growth, in terms of stresses on the environment, more than anything else. Egypt, approximate population for 2013 is 85 million people, with a growth rate of 2.29, so they double every 31 years. So in 31 years, Egypt is expected to have 170 million people living along a small corridor of the Nile. Lebanon, my country and Eduardo's ancestral country, is fairly small. It's 15th ranked in population with 4 million people, but the population density is quite high. We have about 700 to 800 people per square kilometer, and then when you look at about 80% of the population is in metropolitan area, 70% along the coast. So the population, the density in those cities is quite high. Arab world, as we all know, is rich in oil and gas, and it's got minerals in abundance, but it is water poor. If you look at per capita availability, and you can see most of the countries are below 1,000 cubic meter per person per year. Keep in mind that water stress is at 1,500 meters cubed per person per year. Scarcity is at 1,000. Severe scarcity is at less than 500 cubic meter per person per year. And when we talk about 500 cubic meters per person per year, that number makes life difficult. It affects health, it affects economic development, and people cannot survive at this rate. But you see most Arab countries are like that, are much below the 500. If you look at the 500, this is the orange, the darker orange, and most of the Arab countries are like that. The funny thing about Libya is the population is small, and they have tapped an oasis. And Gaddafi, when he was still in power, made that great green man-made river. And he had a huge pipeline from the oasis in the desert, in the southern part here, pumping it all the way up. And if we compare the Middle East and North Africa, which covers the Arab countries, look at the resources per capita compared to other countries in the world. It's minuscule. So we have that issue as a problem. Keeping this as a background, I jump now over to climate change. And I always start this because once I was riding a taxi and I got into the taxi with the driver and it was hot in our winter. So for us, November, December, January is where we get our cold weather. And I was in the taxi around January, it was 20 degrees Celsius, and the guy was going, ooh, it's hot, and that's climate change for you. So that triggered in my mind. And then you talk to students, and they talk about climate change all the time, but there's a difference. Day-to-day variability in weather, that's weather, the day-to-day variability in temperature, rain, that's weather. But when you average this over a long period of time, when you average temperature, precipitation, days of sunlight, humidity, all this stuff over a long period of time, that's climate. And weather is very difficult to predict. And when you look at the weatherman on TV, or the weather lady, they stand up there and they tell you the next 5 days it's going to be, I think here it's easy. You know, it's going to be sunny. Yeah, it's going to be sunny. But then if it rains, oh, the stupid weather person. You know, they don't know anything. But it's not their fault. You cannot really tell. It's very dynamic. So this is what I want to set out originally, so that we don't get into a mess about, you know, the variability, the day-to-day, week-to-week variability. So what is climate change as a definition? It's the variation in Earth's global climate or in a regional areas over a period of time, over an extended period of time. It is caused by processes internal to the Earth and sometimes external, like sunlight intensity varying and causing different changes in our climate. More recently, geologically speaking, human activities have been a major cause of climate change. According to the IPCC, the fourth assessment report, 90 to 95% likelihood that the current climate change is affected by human action. The fifth assessment report is coming up very soon, and they're going to, I think, raise the 90 to 95% maybe a little bit. They state that warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Nobody can now say, this is a whole lot of baloney, nobody's doing that. It is changing, it has changed, it is not debatable. And most likely, very likely, it is due to anthropogenic effect and mainly through the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. What are the activities that we talk about and that are really the forces into this? Fossil fuels, biggest demon. Carbon dioxide and methane are the catch-alls. Aerosols, they produce cooling effect, and it has helped plateau the temperature trend in the 20th century. Cement manufacturing, I'm listing these because they are of particular interest also to Lebanon. The third largest source of carbon dioxide is cement manufacturing. Agriculture through deforestation, land use. When we talk about agriculture, urban sprawl, deforestation, which you feel right here, is another major problem. And funny enough, livestock is responsible for 18% of the greenhouse gases emitted in the world, the CO2 equivalent. And 65% of human introduced nitrous oxide. You think livestock and Arab world doesn't compute, but the largest herd of dairy in the world at 35,000 heads, just for a private herd, is in Saudi Arabia. So that's just to give you an idea of what it is. 35,000 heads, they have to water them, they have to feed them, they have to milk them, keep them clean. Their setup in Saudi Arabia, they have air-conditioned barns for them. People live worse than the cows in many places. So it is unbelievable, but this is the cost of certain policies and strategies. So what's to look forward to? A temperature rise of 0.1 degrees Celsius per decade over the next 2 decades is expected, even if we maintain our current or the 2000 level emissions of greenhouse gases and aerosols. The range of temperature increase is anywhere between 1.8 degrees Celsius and 4 degrees Celsius. This is something, if you keep it in the back of your mind when we come to Lebanon, it will be quite interesting to see. The IPCC projections, when they took 21 global circulation models and average them out, you could see that focus here of the annual temperature increases and the winter and summer differences, and it's quite large. I mean, up to 4 degrees Celsius in terms of temperature rise. 4 degrees Celsius is nothing to sneeze at. Imagine if it is 34 or 30 degrees Celsius, you feel a little bit comfortable. It goes to 32, you start suffocating. And if you go out from this room to the outside, it's 2 or 3 degrees difference only. And it's much cooler outside than here. So you can imagine on a large scale what this does. Also precipitation, anywhere between 20 to 25% on average across the area is expected, except in the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula there is an expected increase in precipitation. What's installed for the Arab world in terms of projections? There is an overall decline of rainfall. In Northern Africa we saw that, and it's nearly 30% on average, and sometimes it's higher in Morocco. And that estimate is with high confidence. When we look at the southern Arabian Peninsula, there is a lower confidence, but we expect it to be a wetter summer, because that's when they get their monsoon. They get their rains in summer rather than in winter. There is an uncertainty regarding the monsoon itself. Is it going to shift? How it's going to move? Is it going to track a little bit more to the west? Is it going to track up north a little bit? There's that uncertainty, but it is quite concerning. The overall effect is that the changes are the following: northward shift of Saharan climatic zone. So the Saharan climatic zone, the dry, arid, is going to shift northwards into the Mediterranean, and it's going, and the Mediterranean coastal region is going to retreat north in the Sahelian region. What else do we expect? We expect heat waves to become more frequent and protracted with higher temperatures. We do get heat waves every year, so it's normal, part of the normal pattern. But what climate change is doing to us, it's magnifying these effects. It's coming in, and instead of a degree or 2 or 3 increase, we're getting 2, 4, and 5 degrees. Instead of 2-3 days of a heat wave, we're getting a week or 10 days of a heat wave, and it's getting longer. These heat waves and these extremes are triggering forest fires, a lot of forest fires. You don't imagine the Arab world with forests. Morocco is full of it, Lebanon is full of it, and some parts of the northern Mediterranean, Tunisia and northern Syria along the Mediterranean coast, we have forests. And these are being decimated year in, year out by fires. We are getting more and more dust and sandstorms. These are becoming bigger and longer, and their impact is both erosive in terms of removing soil, topsoil that is useful for agricultural growth, and also they are a cost, a nuisance cost, if you will. Imagine Sao Paulo being covered with huge, centimeter or 2 of sand all over. Cleaning that up and disposing of it is going to be extremely costly. That is on the economic side. On the health side, breathing it in and all that goes in with it, in terms of asthma, heart trouble, etc., that's a major issue. Droughts are becoming more and more frequent. I'll show you now a few slides that emphasize this. They are becoming more protracted and more frequent. In Lebanon, the average is once every 6 years. In other parts, it's a little bit shorter, some a little bit longer. Floods are becoming more. We're getting more rain and more intense, not more rain, more intense rain more frequently. And this is causing floods. And because of the rising sea or the severity of the storms, the sea surge, the waves that are coming in are becoming higher, and they're causing trouble along the coast. The Arab world is vulnerable. Needless to say, it's very vulnerable because of the greater seasonal variability in temperature. Imagine in Lebanon, we have mountains that go up to 3,000 meters high. We used to have permanent snow cap on many of those hills. We don't now. We do not anymore. But we get temperatures below zero in winter. And go to the other extreme. Right now, I was in Saudi Arabia 2 weeks ago. Temperature there, in the shade, 50 degrees Celsius. So we get this huge 60, 70 degrees variability in temperature. This large swing is not something to take lightly. And the increased severity in weather events, droughts and floods are making it difficult for countries to cope with. Arab countries are not necessarily rich. They are divided into two groups. You've got the oil producers, which are very rich, and then you've got the non-oil producers, which are more or less poor. And even the rich countries are not are in such a under severe threat and severe vulnerability, they cannot adapt, or they are finding it difficult to mainstream climate change issues into their policies. So, just as a note, between 1980 and 2008, 37 million Arabs were affected by severe storms or natural disasters. $20 billion were lost to these disasters, and mostly, if not all, were weather-based. So we look at the water stress indicator, and that is for now. And you can see the burgundy color, most of the Arab world. It's overexploited. It's not even that it is, close to the limit. It's overexploited. Many, if not most, Arab countries, with the exception of Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria, all the other 22 probably, I don't know about the Mauritania and the Comoros, but most of the others are using more than 100% of the available fresh water. They are desalinating water, they are tapping fossil groundwater, and this is not a sustainable approach that they're doing. So this is one issue. The other issue is the poor adaptive capacity. I alluded to this earlier. You see the dark brown are the countries that are going to have much more difficulty adapting to climate change because of mainly financial issues. And the lighter color they have better adaptive capacity. So what have we been witnessing? I've talked to you this, now this is the talk, now these are the wow pictures. This is the Eastern Mediterranean. You can see a dust storm moving along from Egypt. This is the Nile coming up to the Nile Delta, pushing across the Eastern Mediterranean. This is the Arabian Peninsula. Look at the dust covering this, the extent of the dust. Look at this in Baghdad. You can see the dust storm moving in. It is unbelievable. It's scary. Everything shuts down. Airports stop. Nobody goes out. You wait until this comes through, and then you recover. So these are issues to keep in mind. Drought, if you look at the Fertile Crescent, this brown line is drought. It is more than 20 to 30% less precipitation. In 2008, you can see here northern Syria. This is northern Syria. In 2008, they had the drought that they had been facing culminated in 2008. And it forced more than 500,000 people to immigrate from the northern part of Syria to the more water-secure parts of Syria. This in part, it's not the total reason, not even half the reason. A small part of this caused the troubles in Syria now. This internal migration, this stress, this quiet is purely an environmental and climate-driven phenomenon. If we look at the Qadisiyyi Reservoir in 2006 and look at it in 2009, it is phenomenal. These are things that we are witnessing, and it is not, something that will happen or when climate change happens. No. Climate change is happening. We're witnessing it. We're feeling it. A series of pictures. 751 people died in Algeria in 2001, and $300 million in damage just because of floods. And you can see some of the pictures. In Morocco, 400 houses collapsed and flooded, 89 people died, and hectares of agricultural land were lost. Again, because of flooding. And you can see these. These are all taken from different press agencies. In Egypt in 2006, 118,000 people were affected, 600 flood-related deaths. They did not necessarily die of the floods, but because of some diseases related to floods, etc. And agricultural land was inundated because of that. This is another major loss that we're looking at. In Saudi Arabia in May 2013, this May, in Jeddah, look at the people here, waist high in water. Part of this, we got rain. In Saudi Arabia they do get rain, infrequently. But part of it is because they built where they shouldn't be building. They built right in the wadi or in the arroyo. I don't know what it's called in Portuguese. It's like where the streams come in when the rains flow. And people's, government officials' heads rolled basically. Not literally, but they were taken off and a major change occurred. This also happened in Qasim, right in the middle of Saudi Arabia. Look at the flooding that occurred there. And it washed out roads, it washed out cars. Damage was very high. In Palestine, $50 million in economic damage. You think about it, it's a small amount. But for a very poor community, it's extremely poor, this is a whole lot of money. They don't have this money. And that's in January. Again, in Yemen, another dirt poor country, $1.7 billion in damages were incurred because of flooding in October 2008, raising the poverty rate from 28 to 51%. So these are issues that are happening as we see. It's not that, oh yes, climate change will happen, we need to work about it. This is what people are feeling. And now we're just attaching to it issues with climate change. In Oman, which is at the bottom part and the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, in 2007, Gonu cyclone hit it. And 78, maybe more, 115 people probably died, and $4.4 billion of damage were incurred. And the country was all along the coast inundated. And you can see the damage. It's there. And we were talking, Roberto was here with us yesterday, we were talking about opportunity cost. And okay, the damage is quantified to fix what's broken, but what do we do with the lost time? And this is something that we have to look at. I mean, in the period that it will take to recover this, what would we have been able to do, and how would we have been able to use that fund to improve the livelihood of the country, or the better part of the country? Again, you see, January 2013 was an extremely wet January for the Eastern Mediterranean. We have had, this is, when I was trying to work with the numbers, and we don't have many numbers, it's about the 25-year frequency storm that we got. So, it's percentage-wise, it's a very low percentage of occurrence. But look at the flooding in Jordan, in Qatar, and in Lebanon. We got it all. Every country, we were not spared. We had a lot of snow as well, which is good. Nobody complained. Our only resource for, not only, the major recharge of our water tables is from snow in Lebanon. So we're very happy with the snow, but not happy when going to work in this kind of flooded conditions. And you can think of how long it will take to recover. People would not go to work. So these are days that were lost and not productive. So these are problems that we have. I should turn off my Skype. Yeah. I get my wife or my daughter calling me. Okay. Some numbers. Just some numbers on recent events. Not distant. These are recent events in flood and in Lebanon. In flooding, we had about 440 people die and more than $10 million in damages just due to floods. And in another set of events, in terms of floods, So the losses we were incurring in terms of people dying, in terms not directly related to floods, but directly and indirectly, quite a lot. Saudi Arabia is even worse, $150 million worth of losses due to one event, and 12 billion, I think, 1.2 billion from 9 other events. So these are just numbers that were plucked out and put together. Now I'm back to the boring part. Just talk now. What are the areas that are of effect in the Arab world? And this is common to many other countries, but I just want to run through those so that if you want, we can talk later, open up avenues or venues for discussion. First and foremost, when we think of climate change, I think of health, right? So when we look at health, there are direct temperature effects, because those with heart problems, asthma, the very old or the very young get affected directly. They have a problem and many deaths occur. If you remember a few years back in Europe, in France, Greece, many places in Europe, there were many deaths. And these are supposed to be advanced countries. What about countries that are third world countries that are barely able to make it? Anyway, so extreme events also cause health problems. By, if you have a flood, the flood washes you out and kills you, or brings down your house on you. But also there are stress-related injuries and diseases that occur. When you get a flood, your infrastructure stops working. Your sewage pipelines overflow. So you get all the sewage that was underground on the surface, mixing with your drinking water. You get cholera, you get typhoid, you get hepatitis, you name it, you get dysentery, you get, name it, you get it. And people die because there is not adequate medical facilities. And there are other climate-sensitive diseases. Oh, by the way, extreme events also, they have stress-related disorders. People die because of heart attack. They're looking at their house crumbling, or they lose their entire, lifetime's worth of collection of memories, and they just see it wash away or burn. And this causes stress. People either lose it mentally or die. Climate-sensitive diseases are prevalent. You've got dengue, you've got yellow fever, malaria, encephalitis, all of those that are vector-borne as well. Because when you have floods or you have warm weather, insects love it. They produce at a faster rate, and they have a longer growing season. So their life cycle increases a lot, and you have an abundance of those, and they attack humans. And then finally, air quality, it becomes an issue, and especially with particulates in the air causing damage to lungs. Agriculture and food supply. What I'm talking about, these are just examples. This is not by any stretch exhaustive, but this is what we will suffer from in the Arab world. When average temperatures increase in the agricultural world, the growing season lengthens, and we have relatively cooler springs. Now people think, oh, longer growing season, that's fantastic. But along with the growing season comes the need to irrigate more. So you have to use up more of your resources, and most of the resources are in groundwater, or you need to pump it, so you're using more energy. You're contributing more to climate, to emissions and climate change, and you're taxing your money. There is adverse effect on crops. Again, what happens to people in terms of insects and diseases happens to crops and livestock. There is drier soil occurs, making it much more susceptible and vulnerable to erosion by wind and rain, and then droughts increase and kill your crop. When rainfall changes, precipitation will increase in some higher latitudes and decrease in the subtropical regions. Fine, but that does not mean that the increase is good. Sometimes it comes in at heavy intensity. The pattern of precipitation increases. And again, heavier rain coupled with droughts or lack of cover, more soil erosion, lower soil moisture. And I don't know how well you can see this, but this is the rust infestation in northern Syria into Iraq and Turkey. You can see this area that's green. and within 3-4 months, it's not that it is dry, it's all in the same period of, you can see the infestation spreading and killing off the crop.
Nadim,
Yo.
can you clarify what's rust disease?
It's I think a fungus that hits, or there are two types. One is a fungus, one is a virus, and both like warm temperatures. So
Affect humans? Or
no,
crops?
that just affects crops.
Crops, okay.
And mostly it's going to be here, in this case I believe it's going to be the fungal variety. Oh, sorry, let me go back. This, in 2010, you remember if I showed you the picture of the droughts in 2008, 2009, 2010 was a year of people thinking, wow, thank God, God is now smiling upon us. It rained a lot, and we got this green, lush vegetation. But with that and the higher temperature, the fungus spread and killed all that, all those crops. So they must have been doing something bad. And when we look at forests, funny enough, we do, as I told you, we do have forests. The forest health and productivity is affected because of the stress of higher temperature, higher evapotranspiration. And with this comes in, this forest starts migrating northwards. So the Mediterranean forest will cease to exist. And we have a very few area in Greece and in Lebanon. This ring, Greece, Turkey, northern Syria, Lebanon, this crescent has the last remaining Mediterranean forest. So we have a problem with this. And when this happens, you know, when the forest is under threat, timber production becomes problematic, the quality is poor. When forests die, and with this we have a lot higher temperature, we have forest fires, so there's very little infiltration of water going in. So all of the water would run into streams, the quality of the water becomes poor, wildlife would suffer because of habitat loss, and carbon storage is gone. The forests are gone, carbon is released back into the atmosphere, we have a problem. And outdoor recreation activities, you know, nobody wants to go to burnt out forest. When we look at ecosystem and biodiversity, again, it's very similar to what happens to forest. By definition, an ecosystem is an interdependent functioning system of plants, animals, and microorganisms at any scale. A pond is an ecosystem. A small little pond is an ecosystem. And when climate changes, there is a polar world, to the two poles, and elevational shift in flora and fauna. That is forced by, for terrestrial species, that's forced by climate change. A 2 to 3 degrees Celsius increase to pre-industrial, I'm not talking 2000, pre-industrial levels, will cause 20 to 30% of species to be at risk of extinction. That's a whole lot. And the resilience of many ecosystems will be exceeded. Ecosystems will not be able to survive, and they will succumb. What is also most interesting is the synchronicity between species is going to be lost. I was telling you about insects. They love it when the warm weather comes in, they start producing. But insects have a very fixed life cycle. And I don't know if you have it here, but in Lebanon it's very apparent to us. We have clearly 4 seasons. When spring comes in, when the winter temperature breaks and starts rising, all the fruit trees start budding and flowering. And if this occurs before the insects start producing, let's see, bees are essential for pollinating trees and for producing fruits. So if this flowering occurs before the bees' life cycle comes in, the trees would flower, the flowers would fall, and they would not be pollinated, and the fruit would not be produced. So this synchronicity, which is essential for any life or ecosystem, might be lost, and it will take a while, very long time to recover, and this will put ecosystems, biodiversity, even human food at great risk. In coastal zones, we expect 0.18 to 0.6 meters rise in sea level over the next century, which would inundate wetlands and low-lying areas. And it would erode beaches, intensify flooding because of storm surges, and because of those rising water, sea waters and storm surges, the salinity of rivers and estuaries would rise, killing off whatever sensitive habitats are there. And if we start putting up protection measures on the coast, like breakwaters, etc., it would prevent us from going to the beach, for example. You lose a lot of your sandy beaches. So it's not something that is easy. Keep in mind, I'll show you this is the Nile Delta. If we look at the light blue, it is when sea level rises up to 1 meter. Within a meter rise, this whole area will be lost. And then the darker is up to 5 meters. The thing about this, though, you have to keep this in mind. The delta used to be fed by the Nile. And water from the Nile would come in and spread with the alluvial fan, and a lot of the water would settle in, and you have a water table that's fairly high. What's happening is two things. Because of the high water table, people are farming that area, so they put in wells and they start pumping. As they pump, the water table drops. As this happens, the land subsides, so it becomes lower. Coupled with a rising sea level, so what's happening is two things. The sea is rising and the land is subsiding. So this is only for sea level rise. If we add subsidence of the land to it, which is at a higher rate than sea level rise, this is quite an optimistic estimate of the inundation. A whole lot of areas would be lost. Also keep in mind, Kuwait is entirely flat, practically flat, and at sea level. 30 centimeter rise in sea level will go a long way into Kuwait. Similarly, Bahrain and all the coastal areas of the Arab world. That's where, 54% of the current population of the Arab world lives. So you can imagine what's going to happen. Imagine the chaos that would result from all this, all these issues. Water resources, very brief, I can talk ages. I'm a water guy, so I love talking about this. I kept it one slide. Water availability. What happens is, when net solar radiation increases, temperature increases, it speeds up the hydrologic cycle. So you get more events coming in, and you might have increase in precipitation in some areas and decrease in others, but it's very rapid. And that's why you have increase in intensity. Also with that, when we talk about water availability, the evapotranspiration increases, and plants dig deeper roots to take out water that would have been available to people. So that's gone. Higher temperatures also reduce dissolved oxygen in water bodies. And when they do that, fish and aquatic life die. So you lose a lot of livelihoods of fishermen and etc. Stream, and then also when stream flows are reduced because of lesser water, lesser rain, what will happen is reservoirs will not be filled up as much. A lot of those countries in the Arab world discharge directly their sewage into wherever they have rivers, they discharge into them untreated, or sometimes treated to secondary level, which is not good enough. And this dilution effect is lost. So the water quality is gone, and as we say, quality always affects quantity. If you have poor water quality, you don't have enough water to drink or to use. And sediment, because of increased runoff and erosion, sediment will affect our water bodies. Stream flows will shift to early spring or late winter, and we'll have a longer dry period. Okay, energy production and use. Energy, we'll want more air conditioning. The energy that's used for other practices such as irrigation, pumping or cooling greenhouses, or refrigeration, that is going to rise because of rising temperature. You have to cool more, you have to provide more water for irrigation. That's a whole lot of cost. And other impacts, hydropower generation, because of reduced stream flow you will have less reservoir filled up, you will have less power generated by hydro power. Infrastructure, such as production, transmission, and distribution will be affected by severe storms. Power plant operations can be affected by extreme heat waves. You cannot cool them fast enough. And some renewable sources of energy that we like might not be available to us. Because of the rising temperature, you might have more cloud cover in coastal areas, which would block the sun from your photovoltaic or your solar panels. You know, it's a catch-22, so what do? And sometimes with a equal rise in temperature, you might not have this gradient in pressure, air pressure to work your wind energy. So, and also, you know, protected areas will be affected, and outdoor recreation and tourism will be affected by climate change. Nobody wants to go to a desert or you know, somewhere where it's very hot. So tourism would suffer, and people will not go out, and all that sector would be affected. So, just moving on to consequences on urban areas. I'm throwing these ideas out to you because of some thought. I mean, you're all economists, most of you, if not all, and you can find issues for work in those. In Arab countries, the most that would happen to urban areas is disruption in water and food supply, and reduction in air quality. Also, coupled with that, we'd have reduction in water quality. Groundwater, sea intrusion will happen much faster. We are already suffering from that. We talked about surface water and the quality of that. Infrastructure failure is a great problem that will be faced. Stormwater and sewage networks will be affected. Stormwater networks, they are sized for a certain amount of certain return period. If rain intensity comes in higher, you would need bigger pipes. Also, a lot of the stormwater networks discharge at sea level. If the sea rises, that will cause backwater effect and the whole network would flood. Also, similarly, sewage plants are next to the sea. When they discharge, if the water rises, the sewage plants will be affected. So we will need to rework the entire infrastructure to raise it a little bit higher than sea level, which is extremely expensive. Electric networks, electricity networks, the distribution, heat, severe storms, all that would affect them. So there is an issue there. Transportation networks, especially along the coast, and you saw a lot of the roads that in Saudi Arabia and many of the countries are destroyed by floods. These need to be reworked and redesigned. And coastal erosion, once the coast comes in, is a problem. Stress on public health is enormous. You would need to watch out for people who are vulnerable. You would watch out for diseases that you thought you had eradicated or controlled. They would come back in, and you would spend a lot of money fighting those. And stress on social services. Increase in internal migrations. We saw that in Syria, and we're seeing it everywhere. There are associated unemployment, because when people leave their homes, they're leaving their livelihoods, they're looking for a job, there's no job for them. And what's people don't think about a lot is disruption in school days. When you have all those immigrants coming in, the schooling system cannot handle the doubling of the numbers, so they have to shift classes. Also, many schools do not have air conditioning, so they have to work in cooler times, so they have to come in early, take a long break, and then come in late at night, and this is quite disruptive. So what are the consequences if we don't do anything? There's going to be a reduction in national productivity, due to illnesses, breakdown of services, etc. Conflict over diminishing resources. These conflicts are going to be internal and external, and they could be war. Migration from rural areas to urban areas, and with the associated pressure on infrastructure. And I put in this immigration to better adapted countries because, you know, I was giving this talk once with these ideas in the US, and they said, well, we don't have, we can manage with this, we are adapting. And then I told them, well, yes, but be prepared for a flood of migrants coming in, because they're not going to stay in a diminished country. They're going to come to you, and they're going to put your system under stress. So this is an important component. Just a schematic that I really like. What is the driver in this And I separated everybody talks about mitigation, adaptation. I like to talk about vulnerability and resilience and adaptability. Mitigation starts when economic activities which generate emissions at different concentrations, these affect our climate. So we have to interfere either in economic activities or in the emissions or in the concentration of what's being emitted. That we can reduce the rate of climate change. Then, when climate change happens, and as it is happening, it has physical impact on the ecological, on our ecosystems and our infrastructure. We have to work with that. And these impacts damage our economies. We have to make our economies resilient to these changes, to these impacts, so that we have a longer chance to survive this issue. I'm going to throw out some adaptation mitigation measures for those. In water resources, we need to improve urban demand management. We don't have to start looking for different sources of water. We have to use whatever is available better. We have to manage demand in agriculture. In a lot of the Arab countries, what they do in their agriculture, especially the Eastern Mediterranean, they irrigate not by sprinkler or drip, they irrigate the old-fashioned way where they flood their fields. So it's not at all efficient. We need to improve our storage, water storage capacity. When we have rain, we don't need to irrigate, but that water is going to waste. We need to capture that and use it. We need to look at alternate water resources. Many parts of the Arab world are now using treated sewage effluent. So for irrigating landscaped areas, etc. Landscaping should be done away with. You know, those green stuff like, oh, we're greening the desert. This is crazy. And we should start thinking about virtual water. Keep maybe agriculture to maintain rural life, but rely more on virtual water, importing what we need in terms of food stuff. Food supply in urban areas, we need to start looking at rooftop gardens, community gardens, even vertical gardens, buildings like, you know, those parking buildings. You can build agricultural production into those different levels using renewable energies. So it's not too difficult to use in urban areas. And then we have to do some kind of an agreement with countries that have areas to produce agriculture to bring food supply in and maintain our food security. Air quality in urban areas, we need to maintain those green spaces, which link up nicely with urban agriculture. Our public transport has to be much more efficient in our Arab world. Every family in Lebanon, for example, practically every family in Lebanon has 2 cars. And a 27-kilometer ride for me every day is an hour or an hour 15 minutes wasted on the road. If we go for public transport, it's much easier. Arabs love their cars, but you know we have to work with them to go into a bus or a metro. A lot of the public transport fleet or the cars that are used in many parts are old. They are very polluting. Also, we need to move into different energies, maybe electric cars, hybrid cars, solar-powered cars, liquefied natural gas. All those are options that are not being used. Renewable energy for energy production is a must. Water quality, we need to work on treatment and restriction on use of groundwater. And infrastructure fairness. We need to look at new technologies. We need to look at structural interventions, and most importantly, we need to better zone our areas, not build where we cannot maintain. So that I finish my spiel on climate change. I talk a little bit about Lebanon because I'm Lebanese. Eduardo is of Lebanese ancestry, so you have to bear with us here. Lebanon is around 4.3 million people. Our population growth rate is 1%, close to 1%, and 83% of the population lives in urban areas. And this is Lebanon, this is the Mediterranean. What is nice is we have 2 mountain ranges and a plain in between. And these are the elevations where we have snow. We have this very narrow coastal plain, and most of the people live along here. Plus, only a major hub is here, in the middle of this car. What have we been witnessing in Lebanon? This is part of a study that I had done with a couple of my graduate students. We looked at data from 1875 to 2003, and we're working with this today with Eduardo. The maximum temperature has not changed a lot, statistically not significant, but the minimum temperature has. It has risen by 2.9 degrees Celsius. Remember we talked earlier about the 1.8 to 4 degrees Celsius increase? We are in the 2.9. Part of this is due to heat island effect, granted, but the other part is definitely due to climate change. We have not witnessed any change in average precipitation, but the intensity has changed. You've seen this picture earlier. This is what we've been seeing more frequently than we would like. And these are the storm surges that we've been seeing. Part of these were witnessed this winter, this January. This is right across from my university. This beacon here, this beach here is for our university. We are a little bit too spoiled here. Our snow cover has changed. In 2010, we had the worst snow cover. These are all for the same day, January 12th. And you can see how these have changed over the years. So we have fluctuations, but we are in certain times, this is what we will be seeing. And in 2010, the summer of 2010, people were really in distress. Farmers were in distress. They were paying a lot of money to pump water from the ground, and the water table was dropping very fast. We had lots of forest fires, and look at the erosion I was telling you about. Our topsoil is very thin, 30 centimeters to 50 centimeters on average, and this is lost quite quickly. We've got rivers flooding, and you can see this trailer being taken away, and you can see the peak in our discharge, in our tapping our groundwater. We're using it more and more every year. So, in closing, what are we doing about this at AUB and especially at the Assam Ferris Institute? We looked and are looking at the temperature and precipitation trends. We're looking at how climate change affects drought occurrence and frequency, how climate change impacts evapotranspiration. Some of our professors looked at global circulation models and projected scenarios for climate change in Lebanon. We are looking at adaptation measures and approaches to be followed in Lebanon. The red part is the important part here. It is what Eduardo and I are putting together and working on. It's the impact of climate change on the Lebanese economy. Right now we're looking at the agricultural sector. Hopefully we'll start looking at other sectors as we build this relationship further. So it's really interesting in this sense. And before I close and thank you, I will show you a picture of Eduardo's ancestral village. And this is Beluga in Lebanon. So thank you very much for your patience and your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadim, for this very stimulating talk. We have some time for discussion. If someone wants to raise a question or comment, please. You just have to use the microphone because of the international connection of this seminar.
Yeah, it's a very nice presentation. I really enjoy knowing a lot of things about the Arab world I didn't know before. One thing I would like to ask is, in terms of the Lebanese government, are they doing any kind of policy to mitigate or to avoid climate change?
Yeah, you see, that's a very good question. It's not only the Lebanese government. You see, what I did today, I stayed up late working on this presentation, and I had about 20 slides that I thought, one of which was policy issues. And I was closing all those silly files that I have, and by mistake I closed this one without saving it. And I had a slide that addressed this specific issue. And we have, not only Lebanon, most Arab countries, when I've been participating in the Conference of Parties, the COP meetings on climate change negotiations, we have been to 3 already, or 4, as part of the Lebanese contingency. The Lebanese government is trying. They have signed the Kyoto Protocol, they have ratified it, they have started reporting. We had our first communication to the first national communication to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We did the second. We did a study called NEEDS, National Economic Environmental Development Study. We're looking at adaptation and mitigation. We're looking at those. We are reporting those. But then, when we try to bring it in, we are not mainstreaming any of this information. We're not taking it into a policy, or if we do have a policy, or a declared policy, it's not being implemented. The Arab countries are, as I told you earlier, divided into 2 groups: petroleum producers, non-petroleum producers. And this is reflected in climate change negotiations. The petroleum producers do not want to sign up onto anything that would restrict their or affect their economic survival, mainly their oil. So if anything touches oil, if you look at any taxes in Europe on carbon taxes, etc., that might affect the use of oil, they're going to fight it in climate negotiations. And because of their power and the spread of money in the Arab world, like Saudi Arabia, Lebanon does not dare go against Saudi Arabia. So if Saudi Arabia takes a position, Lebanon will not go against, might go with Saudi Arabia, but it will not go against it, even though this position might be harmful to Lebanon. Same case with Jordan and other countries. There is not this unified stance as to what needs to be done in terms of policy to protect the countries that are not oil producing. And there is not an agreement amongst the Arab world on how to approach it. So we go to those meetings, the AOPEC we call them, the Arab OPEC. They produce a position, and the rest have different positions that they take. It's difficult for us. It's not being mainstreamed in any of the Arab countries, effectively. Yes.
Thank you, Nadim, for this enlightening presentation. It's really amazing to know about such a different environment from considering our environment here, especially water. But I would like you to explain a little bit the institutional framework. You mentioned the need to control water pumping, and this is very complicated. So the institutional framework is very limiting on people believe, well, if I own the land, I own everything is below it, and they can pump it. And it's a cultural thing, and I know the cultural issues in the Arab world is a very strong issue. So how is the institutional framework designed, and how is it possible that you will change to make the adaptation possible?
The problem in Lebanon is, I'll talk about Lebanon specifically, maybe Arab world. I know a little bit about that as well. In Lebanon, there are lots of conflicts in jurisdiction. And this has now been disengaged, disentangled. There is the Ministry of Energy and Water, which controls water and energy components. And Lebanon, 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, for the first time in 30, 40 years, instituted a national water strategy. Part of it was to survey all wells. We have about 216,000 wells throughout Lebanon. Many, if not the majority, are unlicensed. Or if they are licensed, they have lied in their license. Because in Lebanon you can only drill down to 150 meters with a permit. And if you want to drill deeper than 150 meters, you have to get special permission from the, not the presidency, it used to be the president of the republic, now it's the Council of Ministers joint. So it's not the Minister of Energy and Water that gives you the permission, it's the Council of Ministers that gives you, the government gives you permission. People are cheating on that. But now a database is being developed on those, and they're trying to identify those wells and try to control it. Control, as you said, is difficult, because if I own the land, I can do whatever I want to drill. Jordan had a very good idea, the Jordanians. They controlled the well drilling equipment. So in controlling that, you know where if a drill is on the road, it has to have a special permit to be going somewhere. And if it is stopped and they don't have that permit, it's taken off the road. So instead of controlling the well, they're controlling how to drill it and who drills it and the information that's being produced. Lebanon is moving towards that direction. Plus control. So first we need to have a national policy where adaptation or the realization of climate change is in it. And this policy does have it. That's first and foremost. Most Arab world countries are moving towards this, are getting that realization that there is climate change, we need to adapt to lesser water or more expensive water. Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Kuwait are major desalinization, have major desalinization projects. And they control, the government controls that. So it's not a private enterprise. And this, the distribution of water is controlled, but the bad part is in most of those countries, water is made available very cheaply to natives of the country, which is a smaller population, smaller percentage of the actual residents. For example, in the United Arab Emirates, natives do not pay sometimes, or pay very little compared to expatriates who are living there. So the tariff on water is weird, so people abuse that water. They're trying now, these countries are trying now to fix this and make sure that you pay as much as you use. And this is controlling water and making, this is part of the adaptation process. But the first and foremost is raising awareness at the government level, at the population level, and then mainstreaming policies into it. Most countries have ministries of water, ministries of irrigation and water, and they're putting in plans and actions and following up on those. They're trying, but it takes a lot of effort. Most of those countries are not democracies. And the problem with those is that for those to work effectively, you have to have accountability and transparency. And when you don't have a democracy, there's no accountability, and who cares about transparency? So that's I don't know if I answered your question.
Good morning, Professor. I work for the Brazil-Lebanon Chamber of Commerce, so I'll direct my question to Lebanon. And this idea you talked about, adaptation, it's not something you've just started talking about. I read a lecture you had about 5 years ago in 2008 in the American University, and you talked about adaptation and about a joint action being needed between academics, NGOs, policymakers. Do you think you have seen things actually happening? People can see the difference between 5 years ago and now, or it's still beginning to change?
Small changes have occurred. It's good. You see, people are now more receptive to the idea that there is a changing climate, and water is a major problem for us. And through certain NGOs or civil society, not necessarily NGOs, the ministries are now responding, the relevant ministries are now sort of responding to this pressure. Lebanon is sort of a democracy. We have a lot of freedom, little democracy, as one of our politicians says. We talk a lot, we say a lot, but our politicians do not feel the heat, or do not feel the heat. On these issues, we are able to put a little bit of pressure. So there is, I wouldn't say, wow, things are now great. There is a little pressure, there is a slight improvement, and we are doing a little bit better. We need more. We need numbers. And when you face people with numbers, they cannot escape it. And what we lack is numbers. We don't have good data on rainfall. We are afraid to report our rainfall over Lebanon because we're not using our water, we're not managing our water resources properly. We're afraid that Israel will come in and say, hey, you have a lot of water you're not using, we want some of that. And you cannot, put up a real argument for that. So water data is treated as a secret on one part. And another part, corruption is a problem. Because that data is available, and those civil servants sit on it, and to move, you have to pay. And you get a little bit of data. So this is where still a lot of work needs to be done. Making that data available, and using that data to manage our resources, and not only manage, to make sure that we face our people and show our people that this is what we need to do. Numbers don't lie. It's very difficult when you show facts to people to escape it.
Thank you, Professor, for the presentation. As water is a big problem in the Arab region, and irrigation is key for agriculture, two questions. What's the size of agriculture in terms of economic activities in Lebanon? And do you envision the use of other adaptation measures? We in Brazil, we have the transgenic seeds, the use of transgenic, because we have a big government agency here, and it's one of the adaptation measures that could help agriculture in Brazil. That's the question.
What I showed are just ideas for this. Definitely, in terms of agricultural adaptation, there are many things that you can use. You can use, even without going to GMOs, genetically modified organisms, you can use plants that are native, that are not that do not rely on irrigation, that do well under rainfall conditions. You can move. I'm talking about Lebanon, move your production from certain areas that are hot to areas that are cooler or that get more rain. So that's an issue. Water in Lebanon, 60% of our water resources go into agriculture. So that's quite a bit, that's quite high. But when you look at Arab countries, it's quite low. Other countries go into 70-80%, except Kuwait. Kuwait has no agriculture to speak of, and Bahrain to a lesser extent. But other countries, they use a whole lot of water there. And Lebanon's agricultural sector is small. It has been ignored by governments forever. And it only represents 6 to 7 to 8% of the national, GDP.
And it consumes all this water.
But yeah, exactly. But it employs more than 12% of the population. And if you look at the agricultural, not only production, the agro-industry, from production to putting some things in the shelf, making cheese, making juices, milk, etc. It's a whole big industry that has not been properly quantified and addressed. And it is a very lucrative market. A lot of agriculture now is being more consolidated, and bigger agricultural enterprises are being formed that makes agriculture much more efficient. And this is requires investment and a lot of other things. We have lots of other issues that relate to agriculture. But in terms of adaptation, GMOs are definitely one. I'm all for it. I don't care what people are saying that this is going to destroy biodiversity. This will not. I mean, we're just so targeted and focused on areas. Many other issues in terms of irrigation techniques, the technology of it and the management of it, when to irrigate, how much to irrigate. Sometimes you irrigate to 100% of the plant's need. We could irrigate to 70%, save 30% and just lose 10% of production. That's a way of looking at it. We can run hydroponics using wastewater rather than soil-based water. Many options for us available that we should look at. I just scratched the surface for this.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding if you think that you have limited resource for investing in climate change, and then there is an option to reduce emissions, mitigation, and the other option that you mentioned, several actions are targeting adaptation measures. So, because Lebanon is a small country, so probably the contribution in terms of global emissions is small. How do you see this if you have to choose if you invest in mitigation versus adaptation? Does it make more sense to invest in adaptation measures than in mitigation for Lebanon? And are there any policies that are framed as adaptation to climate change?
You're getting me into trouble, but I will say it anyway. Lebanon, for me, adaptation is something that comes in mitigation comes in way after adaptation. We have to focus on adaptation. Our contribution to greenhouse gases is minuscule. Per capita, it's high. And this is what a lot of the Europeans are trying, and the West is trying to say, per capita you're using this much. The Chinese would love the per capita because of the number, but Europeans don't want the per capita for them, but they want it for us. And it is driven, a lot of the policy and the money. Lebanon is very poor. And most of the climate change activities and actions are donor driven. And when these donors come in, they come in with what can we do that's best for our countries, our economies, so they come in with technologies. And technologies are most rewarding financially to them if they're applied into mitigation. Yes. So a lot of, and the government is under pressure to go along with those donors, and they go into mitigation. And to me this is really silly, and we should do away with it. We don't want their dollars. Let's work on our adaptation. We can do it incrementally, bit by bit, so that we can work it through our own. I am for mitigation. It's not that I'm not. If they want to give us the money without any, give us the money without any payback, fine, we'll take their money and use it for that. But we have to focus on adaptation, because this is what is hurting people. If we do not make sure that people stay in the rural areas and reverse the exodus, maybe get people to go out of cities to release the pressure, then we're going to, in a very short time, suffer irreversible consequences, and we'd reach the tipping point very quickly. And I think, when we go into adaptation, that's where the focus should be. That's where I'm pushing in terms of my work, my research on that. Building resiliency and ability to adapt to a changing climate. Mitigation, if they give us and they won't even, by the way, give you the technology. They will sell you the end product, and they will not give you ability to produce locally that. So that's another issue. It's colonialism in another way. I'm sorry for this slightly leftist slant, but this is what's happening. I say it as it is.
So, I have a small comment before we conclude. I don't know if anyone has a question, but anyway, I think this was very stimulating in terms of this partnership that we have established. And for me, it's clear now that we have many options for taking the next steps in terms of topics. And one that's very clear for me now that we should pursue, and we have people here from the Chamber of Commerce, is that it's clear now from your presentation that what's missing there is water, is we have here in abundance in Brazil. And in terms of potential food suppliers, for instance, and this concept of virtual water that you mentioned, I think Brazil poses itself as a key candidate to be one of the main suppliers of resource-abundant products to the world. And given the cultural ties, strong ties that we have with the Lebanese, given the trade culture that comes way back from the Phoenicians, I think Lebanon could be the main port of entry for these trade flows, so that you can get these resource transfers. And if Brazil has a long-term strategic plan in terms of looking at this issue with more care, I think that could be the way. And studies in this area would be very, very interesting in this.
The connect.
Yeah,
So definitely.
That's for us could be a potential next step in terms of the research that we had. Yeah. That's just a comment, maybe thoughts that can come to my mind. Before I'll give the mic for Azoni to conclude, because he's going to talk about our next event, which is about the changing pyramid. It has nothing to do with climate change impacts in Egypt. It has to do to a phenomenon that's happening in Brazil nowadays, in which we'll have a half-day seminar discussing this issue. So I'd like to thank you again, Nadim, for your presentation. And before we close this session, I will pass the mic to you.
I'm starting to get scared because first we had this wave of invasion from Minas Gerais, and now it's Minas Gerais and Lebanon, so it's becoming a threat. But Nadim, it was a pleasure having you here, and I hope this cooperation really flourishes and goes up, and I would like very much to visit the place where Eduardo came from, and maybe blame them on being here. But I would like to mention the next seminar. It's about pyramids, but it's the social pyramid and how it's been changing. We all know about social programs, etc., etc., and this has consequences. So we have a presentation by Professor Mazon. It's on the 22nd, Thursday here in the morning. So Professor Mazon has studied changes in the population and social pyramid and consumption patterns. And then we'll have a presentation by Elena Lazardo from Oviedo and Illinois on the true cost of living index for Spain regions. Then Rafael Coutinho from FIPE will present the changes in household expenditures survey from FIPE and the changes he's been observing there. And then Alex Almeida and myself will present a comparison of cost of living levels for Brazilian metropolitan areas. And I will present an allocation of national consumption to municipalities in Brazil. So it'll be a morning on consumption, cost of living, and well-being in regions. You are all welcome. And the flyers will be released right now. And so thank you very much, Eduardo.
Yeah, just I could not forget to thank very much the support we received from the National Institute of Science and Technology and Climate Change that was responsible for the official invitation that for Nadim coming here and spending this week with us. We are very pleased we are part of this institute that helps us fostering research on climate change here. So I thank you all for coming. I hope you have enjoyed Nadim's presentation. Nadim, it was really a pleasure having you here, and I would like to conclude with a round of applause for